Hi, this is Herb Chabot at the Dr. Vax channel. We live in crazy times. As many of you have learned from watching other videos, I have grandchildren all over the world, some of which I haven't seen for a while. Since my wife and I had COVID back in March, and we think we probably still have immunity, we decided to risk taking a trip to a southern state where we have a condo that's just a few miles from our grandchildren. So we put on our K95 masks and we hopped on an airplane. Now, I've never had any fear of flying, but this flight was absolutely terrifying. Not something we wanted to do often, so we planned to stay for about 6 weeks. When we got to the condo, I realized we weren't as well organized as I thought we were. The first crisis was I couldn't find the remote controls for the television. And so I decided I needed to 3D print a Caddy that I could mount on the wall for those. We found that things in the bathroom weren't as well organized as we would like. We'd like things to be in closed containers when we're not here. And I like to fix things, so I keep every nut and bolt from anything I've ever assembled together, and I needed a way to organize those. More importantly, I have a bunch of baseball caps and I needed a way to hang those in the closet, and our drawers were filled up with cords that I wanted to be able to organize. So I have a couple 3D printers in a lab I set up here so I could make videos. I'll show you a picture of that. And I could easily go onto an online site like Thingiverse and download some models. But I wanted these to be just right. And much of the power of 3D printing is you can customize items easily. Yes, it might take a few hours for them to print. This was printed at a very low resolution at a 0.3 millimeter layer height, and it looks pretty ugly. But it still took about 2 hours, 2.5 hours to print. At a more appropriate resolution, it's probably a 5 or 6 hour print. But you know, if I order something online, I don't get it till the next day anyways. And this is designed exactly for my two remotes. In fact, I think I'm going to reprint it with this opening a little bit smaller. So that is the goal for today. I'm going to teach you how to design your own custom storage containers, accessories for use around the house. And I'm going to teach you how to do this using two very, very simple techniques. So stay tuned and let's learn something together. Before we get into the heart of this video, I want to talk about 4 ways that I generally find models. I either find them on the internet in a program like Thingiverse, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute, or there are 3 computer-aided design, 3 programs designed to create models that I use very often. I use TinkerCAD because it's so darn easy, and that's what we're going to use today for things that are simple. I use FreeCAD for things that are more sophisticated, and there are a bunch of videos about both of these on the channel. And I use SCAD for things I want to share, that I want to make it easy for people to manipulate. I'm going to show you a little bit about SCAD and TinkerCAD today. Now, for many of us, the first place we go if we're looking to print something might be Thingiverse. So if we go to Thingiverse, I want to point out something that I didn't actually recognize for a long time that makes it much easier to browse through and find things. If you go to the Thingiverse user interface, there is an item here that you can click on that will list categories. So I could go right to household, let's say to bathroom, and then I could find all sorts of accessories that I could 3D print for my bathroom. I could click on that again, and this time I could look at office organization. and I could find accessories for those. But these are basically one size fits all. Whatever size the container is, that's the size I'm going to get. But there's another very powerful capability in Thingiverse. I did a whole video on this last week that I'll link to above because we're not going to go into a lot of detail here. But that is the ability to have customizable items. So if you go over to Explore and you go to Customizable Things, you'll see that all of the items listed here, let's look at this scoop here, have a link called Open in Customizer. Now, unfortunately, the customizer in Thingiverse doesn't work all the time. And I don't know if it's a software bug issue or it's a resource issue or it's a compute power issue, but it doesn't work all the time. But there's an alternative way to customize items. And all you need to do is go to the file area, click on Files, and download the SCAD file. So we're going to download scoops2.scad. Then you need to go to a website called OpenSCAD. And it's openscad.org. And on this website, you can download the version of OpenSCAD for your particular machine. Now, once you've downloaded the version of OpenSCAD for your particular machine, you can open it up. We're going to open it here. And if you've done things before, they'll show up here, but we're going to click on Open. And now I'm going to navigate to my download folder and open scoop2.scad. Now, this is at first going to look a bit intimidating because SCAD is in fact a programming language. And in the video that I linked to before, I taught you all about this programming language. For today, all we want to do is take and drag this programming panel so it's closed, because we just want to look at this item here. And we can scroll into the item with our scroll wheel on our mouse. We can use the left mouse button to rotate the item. We can use the right mouse button to move it around. Now you'll notice this panel over here on the right called Customizer. Well, that's how we can take and change our item. So I can make it bigger. I can change its shape. This is all customizable by changing these parameters. Now, one important gotcha. You may not see that panel on the right-hand side when you first open up SCAD. And if you don't, click on the item called View in the SCAD menu and make sure Hide Customizer is not clicked. So if I hide it, it goes away. If I click on View and unhide it, it appears. And that's exactly how I produced this container. I started with a downloaded SCAD file and I customized it. That's how I produced this container. And you can learn how to do that in much more detail in the video I produced last week. But now I'm going to show you how to design things from scratch yourself. Here is an example of a standard, more or less standard USB cable, a large USB connector on one end, a mini connector on the other. It might be a lightning connector on this end. What I wanted to be able to do is put the large connector through this hole here. So it had to be large enough for the large connector, and then be able to wrap my cord around this cable wrap and put the small end through, and that would keep it from unwrapping. Very simple. And these happen to look sort of cool. They look like Batman weapons of some type. So how did I produce this? Well, I produced it in TinkerCAD. So let's go to TinkerCAD together. So go to tinkercad.com, create an account, and then you want to click on Create New Design. Now, in order to design something, you have to think about what you want to design. Now, you can get ideas by looking online, and if you were going to resell these, you'd have to worry about patents and things, but I think for personal use, you're probably okay. So get some ideas by looking online, or just be creative, because it's so easy to try it over and over again. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. So for this design, we're going to start with a cylinder. We're going to drag it over here. We're going to turn it into an oval. And then we might want to sort of get a ruler out and get an idea of how big we want it. This happens to be about 75 millimeters, but get your ruler out and get a sense of what size you're looking for. So we're going to make this, I'm actually going to make this one a little bigger, 90 millimeters. And remember, we're going to need enough space for this connector. And that connector is, about almost 15 millimeters. So let's say we want the holes to be 20, we want some space around it. Let's make this other dimension, we'll make it 40 millimeters. Whoops, not 409, 40. Now I'm going to click on Top View, and when you're looking at it from the top, you can look at it, or in fact, when you're looking at it from any view, you can look at it as a perspective view, sort of a three-dimensional perspective view, or what they call as a flat view. That's actually an orthogonal view. The orthogonal views I find easier to draw with. You switch those by clicking here. So you want, if it says click to flat view, you want to click it. Now, I can just take another cylinder, which is a circle. I can place it right there. I can take another cylinder, which is a circle. I can place it right there. The next step is I'm going to select this whole item and click on this item here, which is a line. And I'm going to click on this little button here to align these horizontally in the middle. So those are now aligned. Now, if I take and I group this and click on the group icon here, it will cut those holes out. Great. Now, this would work, but I want to be able to hold on to the cable better, so I want some notches here. Now, I could make those notches circular, or I could make those notches square. You can do it either way. We're going to make them circular, so we're going to take and drag a cylinder here in here. I'm going to drag a cylinder in here. I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. We'll make that 30. We'll make this 30. Whoops, wrong one. This dimension here, we'll make this 30. Now I could leave them oval like this, or I could make it circular. That's really personal preference. If I select these two items by clicking and then doing a shift click, and then select this third item, I can use Align again, and this time I'm going to align them in this direction by clicking on Align. Group the whole thing, and group it together. We've now made a cable wrap, but if you look at it closely, you'll see the edges are not really smooth. The reason for that is if I ungroup this, and I ungroup it again so we're back to the basic shapes, if I click on one of the shapes, you'll see there's an item here called sides. I want to increase that. That will tell you how many line segments are used to make the curve. And in the old days when computers were slow, you might have wanted to have that a smaller number. We want to always just drag it all the way to the right. So we're going to go to all of these items and make the sides as round as possible. Whoops. Select that one. Now we're going to select this whole item again, and we're going to group it, and there you have it. Your cable wrap ready to go. Okay, now let's do something that's a little trickier. That one was really easy, and you get the idea that you can conceptualize things and make them yourself. So I want this hook, and I'll show you this picture here of how I use this. And so it's going to go over the rod in my closet, so I need to know the size of that. And then it's going to hang a hat. So how do you make this shape? Well, in Thingiverse, you combine shapes together. And I have a playlist here with a whole bunch of different Thingiverse examples you can look at. But for today, we're just going to keep it simple. So let me go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to click on Create New Design again. And we have to think about what this is. Well, it looks to me like it's a couple circles that are cut off. There are lots of different ways we could cut off circles. So let's start with a cylinder. And how big should this cylinder be? Well, first of all, we're going to reduce the height because we don't want this to be really tall. So let's make it, I don't know, we'll make it 10 millimeters. And then we have to go into our closet and measure the diameter of our closet rod. And we want to make it a little bit bigger so it'll clip on there nicely. So let's say for argument's sake, if I look here at what I actually ended up with, I ended up with about 30 some millimeters. So I'm going to make this 30 by 30. Now, one of the things I have to do is I have to hollow this out. So how do we hollow this out? Well, before we do that, remember we're going to increase the number of sides so it's rounder. And now if I take and I hit Command D or Control D and make another copy of this shape, I can make this shape a little bit smaller than my original shape. So the original shape is 30 by 30. So if I want the walls of this hook to be, I don't know, this looks like, I think I made them about 3 millimeters. Yeah, it looks like about 3 millimeters. Then I need the inner circle to be 6 millimeters smaller, 3 millimeters on each side. So this is 30. So let's make this 24 by 24. And now I can switch this by clicking on this icon here to a hole, and I can drag it in the middle. But how do I get it exactly in the middle? Well, I use my old friend Align. So I select them both, I click on Align, and I align on this dimension and this dimension. And then I take and I group them together, and now I have a ring. So that ring is the beginning of this model. Now, how do I get this part cut out? Well, I take any shape I want. I can take a circle here, and I can overlap it on that ring, just like this, until I get about the shape I want. And the key here is that I want this part to be on the vertical axis and this part to be a little bit over. So we actually have to make this circle pretty big here to get that aligned the way I want. So I select these two items now, and I group them, and now I have one part of my hook. Well, what is the other part of the hook? Well, it's the same thing flipped over. So Command D or Control D will create another copy. And I go to this icon here called Mirror, and I'm going to flip it on this axis. And I position it down here, but that's not quite right. But I can take and rotate that around until that just fits. Now, Sometimes it's a little tricky to align these things. Let's take and move this up here, make it a little bigger. So I can go down here to Snap Grid. See this in the bottom right-hand corner? I can turn that to 0.1, and then I can move this even more finely until it aligns. I can select these two items. I can group them together. And we have our closet hook. So producing items is really all about conceptualizing them and then assembling them together. So let's conceptualize this item for a moment together. What is it? Well, it's 2 cups. We've learned how to make hollowed out items by putting a hole inside another hole. In this case, the inner hole doesn't go all the way to the bottom. And then I just dragged a rail behind it and assembled them together. So let's look at this completed model for a minute together. We'll look over here and say tinker this. And I'm going to select this model. I'm going to ungroup it. So you'll see here we have an oval container and then another oval container that was pulled up a bit. That's how we created the base. Then we have a rod on the back. When we assemble these all together and group them, we end up with this wonderful shape. Now, how did we know how big to make it? Well, we could measure this, but because it's an oval, it's a little tricky about getting the dimensions right. Well, when you print small things on 3D printers, it's really fast. So you want to decide how big this oval should be? Make a, I don't know, 1 millimeter or even a 0.4 millimeter or 2-layer height oval, print it on your printer, and make sure it's going to fit. So producing wonderful items consists of either downloading SCAD files and using OpenSCAD to customize them. And in the video from last week, I showed you how to do that in a lot of detail. Or using a computer-aided design program such as TinkerCAD or FreeCAD to design them from scratch. Now for today's models, because precision wasn't important, I used TinkerCAD. Very, very fast. If I needed something precise, I would have used FreeCAD. Folks, I hope you learned something today. Hope you had a little fun watching this. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, tell all of your friends about it, and let's continue to learn things together.